Hello, my name is Sharon Koehn, and I'm extremely grateful to the Alzheimer's Society of Canada for funding my project, Building Trust to Facilitate Access to Dementia Care for Immigrant Older Adults, the role of the multicultural services sector. We've been doing research for some time that looks at the complicated nature of access for all people. We know that people need to first identify their own need for care or for a diagnosis. They need to then be able to navigate their way to appropriate care or appropriate services and supports. And that's a very complicated process in itself. They need appropriate information so that they can find out who they need to go to, and then they need to be able to get there. So that involves all kinds of things, including transportation, language, and so on. Once they get to an appropriate service provider, they have to convince that service provider that they have a legitimate need for that care. And the service provider has to believe them. And so many different things get in the way of that. The person's language ability, their familiarity with services, their education, and so on. And the service provider tends to have biases of their own. They may think that because a person is of a certain demographic, that they will or will not make better use of care or less use of care if it's offered. Regardless, once an offer is made, and that offer may be for a prescription, it may be for a screening service to further determine whether or not somebody has a need for care, or it may be a referral to some other kind of service. Once that offer is made, it then comes back to the person in need of care, who has to determine whether or not they are going to accept that. And often a person's culture may influence that decision, but sometimes it's geography. If the offer involves having to travel a long distance, for example, that may be very difficult for somebody who is an older adult, for example. Finally, we see that all of these things are influenced by the nature of the care that is offered, whether or not it's easy to get through to that care, what kinds of resources you need to get there. Do you need several referrals, or can you go there directly? So for example, the most accessible form of care, one might say, is an emergency service, because it's open 24/7 and everybody knows where the hospital is. But that's not necessarily the best way to access care or the right kind of care that you need. And so these are some of the things we need to take into consideration. It also depends where you live in the country as to what's available. What's available in a large city, for example, may be very different than what is available in a rural locality. So all of these things play into whether or not people can access care. Now, we know that establishing one's own need for professional attention, securing a diagnosis, and accessing suitable information and social and medical supports is very much complicated when people with dementia are relative newcomers to Canada. Lack of familiarity with the language, culture, geography, transportation, and health and social systems, and a lack of eligibility or resources needed to acquire some services combine as barriers to access. In order to navigate these systems, older immigrants and their families often turn to people they trust. Very often these are frontline workers in multicultural service agencies. Our research seeks to understand if and how these relationships can be leveraged to improve access to information, services, and supports needed by persons with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and their informal caregivers, who are from the sizable Punjabi and Korean-speaking communities in the Fraser Health region of British Columbia. Our research will identify strategies that can foster relationships of trust, that in turn build opportunities for access for immigrant consumers of dementia-related services to multicultural agencies, and from those multicultural agencies to formal dementia support systems. So there has to be a flow of trust all the way from the consumer through the intervening agency to the formal support systems in order not to lose those opportunities for access. We are grateful to the funders of this research for the opportunity to establish equity of access to the supports needed by all persons with Alzheimer's disease and their families. Our approach to addressing the challenges faced by older immigrants living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias is guided by a commitment to the principles of universal design, whereby the benefits of designing interventions that overcome specific barriers identified by a small group of older adults, such as immigrant seniors, is felt by the larger population of people affected by the disease. Strategies that reflect the importance of developing trust to establish access have the potential to significantly improve the chances that marginalized groups, including those marginalized by their experiences of the disease itself, can optimize their quality of life throughout their illness journey. This research will give us the opportunity to interview all of the stakeholders in the process and engage them in collaboratively in developing strategies that can overcome the barriers that we identify, and specifically to build trust along that chain of referral and identification. So again, we thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to reporting back on our findings in 2 years from now.